Glen name comes a lot when you talk about whiskey. So what's the significance?
So Glen basically in Gaelic means valley. Scotland is a country of a lot of valleys. When a consumer in India probably, I would say, he thinks Glen as one whiskey or a similar types of whiskey. So he would say, I want to drink a Glen. The idea here is to educate him and to make sure that he takes the name of a particular Glen. In my case, Glenfiddich. There's a region in Japan called Suntory, as per my knowledge, has been making fantastic whiskey.
How can I immediately note a few things about a whiskey and say, fine, yeah, this is refined, this is nice?
There are 4 parts to the tasting of a single malt whiskey. First, we judge the whiskey by its color. Then we see the density of the whiskey. And then probably we go towards the nosing and the palate of things. There are citrus notes. There are notes like walnut, like dry fruits, like raisins, like burnt wood, ethanolics.
But how does it matter what notes are there?
It matters a lot.
Welcome to Deto Speaks. I am with Angad Singh Gandhi. He is the brand ambassador for Glenfiddich in India. Welcome, Angad.
Thank you so much, Deepak. How are you?
I'm very well, Angad. I'm very well. And, I've always heard so much about you from Zubin, who is a common friend. And I wanted to take the opportunity to introduce look, I mean, everybody, many people, all the men, they have their liquor. But talk about some of the aspects about liquor, and dig into your expertise. So the first question that I have for you is, and by the way, I'd like to say that I understand watches, right? And in the world of watches, there are a lot of brands which are somewhat undervalued. Right? And I'm pretty sure in the world of whiskeys, which is something you deeply understand, there's some undervalued names.
For sure there are, yeah, absolutely.
So why don't you give me 2-3 undervalued names?
If you can give me a few examples of watches which are...
So for example, in the top end, from the Swatch repertoire, there's this brand called Breguet, and I've already done a podcast on that. But Breguet is, the Abraham Louis Breguet, the founder of the watch in 1775, is known to be the father of modern watchmaking. He's the one who did, rotatory, movements. Movements, the thing is, self-winding movements, right? Then he was the one to start tourbillon.
Wow.
Yeah, these are two amazing things, and then there's a list of other.
Got your point. Yeah. So far,
but not too many people care about Breguet so much. To my mind, they should. That's the reference point.
I mean, that's great. I mean, there are a lot of brands that I feel are still really undervalued or not been given that importance yet. But I mean, if you see single malt whiskeys, the category that I represent, it's not a very old category. This category has just been there for 60 years. Before that, the world was mostly consuming blended whiskies and cognac. So if you talk about single malt whiskies, it's the whole category started in the 1960s. To answer your question straight up, the 2 brands that I feel are undervalued would be Glendronach, which is a fantastic whiskey which I think still needs a lot of eyeballs, and other would be the parent brand of William Grant, where William Grant, our founder, used to work before he started Glenfiddich as a distillery. A brand called Montlac Distillery there in Speyside, again, a fantastic whiskey. I think these 2 brands again, I think are gonna do great with times to come, yeah.
Okay, great. So those are 2 brands. Now, while you mentioned this Glen name comes a lot when you talk about whiskeys. What is this, this thing about Glen names?
Yeah.
Why so? What's the significance?
So Glen basically in Gaelic means valley. Scotland is a country of a lot of valleys. That's why a lot of areas are named with Glen as a prefix there. And that's where the name Glen comes from. So like Glenfiddich is Valley of the Deer. That's where deers used to live back in the day, and the distillery was made in a small town called Dufftown. Today there are so many different Glens in the world. We have Glenfiddich, Glenlivet, Glenmorangie, Glenmoran, Glenfarclas, Glenkinchie, Glendronach that I just spoke about. So yeah, it's a synonym, it's a big name.
It's not necessarily one valley, multiple valleys.
Yeah, it's all different valleys.
All different valleys.
Yeah. And consumers, when a consumer in India probably, I would say, he thinks Glen as one whiskey or a similar types of whiskey. So he would say, I want to drink a Glen. The idea here is to educate him and to make sure that he takes the name of a particular Glen. In my case, Glenfiddich.
Very nice. Very cool. Very cool. And is there anything about a certain all these valleys, that adds to the profile of a whiskey, or how does it vary?
Sure. So in Scotland, there are 5 big predominant regions of single malt making. The Lowlands, the Highlands, Islay, Campbelltown, which is all the islands on the west side, and Speyside, where we come from, which is the biggest or the region where maximum whiskey brands come from Speyside. They all have different characteristics attached to the whiskey. For example, Islay whiskies are known to be more peated, for a layman, known to be more smoky in their character, and whiskies from Speyside are considered to be more fruity, floral, sweet, easy to drink, with some smoky notes as well. Whiskey down in the Lowlands are mostly grassy. I would say more vegetal notes from them. So yeah, that could be a differential point between the whiskeys from these 5.
Very cool. No, thanks for sharing that. And we were talking about it, right? These characteristics of whiskeys, peated, as you said, you just mentioned grassy, and there are many more other characteristics, right? Can you delve a little deeper on that, so that people understand what this is, and if at all, like for somebody like me who's not as educated, and my palate is not as trained as yours, right? Barely trained rather. How can I immediately note a few things about a whiskey and say, fine, yeah, this is refined, this is nice?
So again, it all depends from category to category, and it's an ocean of knowledge there. I'm just gonna make it more relevant and stick to single malt whiskeys here. When we taste a whiskey, there are 4 parts to the tasting of a single malt whiskey that we call CNPF. First, we judge the whiskey by its color. How dark is it? How light is it? Which can give us an idea about how old that whiskey is. Thumb rule is, the darker the color, the older the whiskey.
Okay.
Then we see the density of the whiskey, how long those legs are of the whiskey, not mine. That gives us an idea of, again, how old that whiskey is. The denser the whiskey, the older the whiskey.
Okay. And then the drops or the legs are longer.
Yeah, for an older whiskey.
Yeah.
And then probably we go towards the nosing and the palate of things, and to generally open a whiskey, we add a few drops of water, which helps you open a whiskey up. It could be different characteristics that you get. The few of the notes which are quite common and you'll get in probably most of the whiskeys would be flavors of banana, honey, caramel, some sugar notes, some sweeter notes, which mostly tend to come from ex-bourbon casks, which are probably one of the highest used casks in whiskey making. Ex-bourbon means it had bourbon inside them, made up of American oak, about 200 liters of capacity, gives whiskey more sweeter notes. The other big characteristics that comes from the ex-sherry casks, which are made up of European oak. Ex basically mean that they had sherry inside it before, would give you more spicy, more smoky kind of notes. So these two would be the general 2 big baskets of keeping whiskeys in, but then again, there could be a lot of fine, thin lines that can be drawn towards it. There are citrus notes, there are notes like walnut, like dry fruits, like raisins, like burnt wood, ethanolics. When we talk about Islay whiskies, which a lot of people are fan of, that peatiness is what people really enjoy. So these would be the general few baskets when we keep different flavor profiles of whiskey.
So how easy? I'm sure you can immediately figure out, okay, fine, this.
No, I can't. No.
It really takes a very experienced palate then, and an experienced nose.
For everything that we do, probably. Not only whiskey, I mean, even for wine or for things like cognac, you do need a extensively trained palate, and you have to be extremely particular and, methodical about it. It takes time to develop that kind of a learning, but also some people are genuinely naturally blessed,
Okay.
And they have a great palate and they have a great nose, and I can say for our malt master, Brian Kinsman, a great friend of mine and malt master for Glenfiddich. I mean, he's worked on his palate. He has been trained on developing a great palate, and I think it can definitely come with a lot of practice and dedication if you have towards your job. Yeah.
So I have a very novice-like a question, Angad. Now, since it is difficult to kind of make out what exact notes are, then for a person who is having a nice whiskey, fine. But how does it matter what notes are there?
It matters a lot.
Tell me. So that's what I want to.
Consumer is drinking his whiskey to feel a type of flavor, a type of complexity on his palate. In case of blended whiskies, people tend to go towards the smoothness of the whiskey and they don't go towards the complexity of the whiskey. Whereas in single malts, people go for characterful, complex whiskies, which will give them a certain kind of flavor. For example,
Aftertaste.
Exactly. For example, like a Christmas cake. There's a certain flavor towards it. Now, think about getting the same flavor from a whiskey as an aftertaste. How beautiful would that be, right?
Yeah.
So, as I was mentioning the finish to you, a lot of people judge a whiskey by its finish. Wine as well, right?
Yeah.
The tannins that stick to your palate for a longer time and the flavor and the crunch that you get out of it is an overwhelming feeling, and that's why people indulge in whiskey and a lot of other things.
It's very cool. Thank you for explaining that. This is such a nicely put, explanation to all these questions. So, while we were talking about it, you mentioned some casks, right? That there are American casks of the American oak, right? And then there are American whiskey names as well. How do American whiskeys, and there are some great names, compared to your Scottish whiskey single malts? How do these two things differ? And what are the difference in profiles?
See, American whiskies, again, America has a lot of categories of whiskeys. For example, bourbon is a type of whiskey made in America. Rye is a type of whiskey made in America. American whiskey in itself is another category of whiskeys. If I would be general about the entire sphere of things, I would say that American whiskeys are not as aged as Scottish whiskeys, but extremely characterful. They have sweeter undernotes of whiskey. And they are sometimes, or the ones that I have tried, are mostly at a higher ABV, which is alcohol by volume.
Okay.
For a layman, are at a higher strength.
Correct.
On the other side, Scottish single malts are having a mix of different types of flavors. For example, you can find a single malt with a lot of umami flavors. You can find a single malt with a lot of yeah, for sure.
Okay, that's something interesting. Yeah, that immediately takes me to Japanese food, right?
So what I was trying to tell you is that today the types of casks that they're using to age and finish their whiskey are humongous. A cask aging is something which is more than 1 year or more than 2 years. In Scotland, it has to be more than 3 years of age in particular cask. But finishing could be as less as 2 to 3 months in a cask. And after aging, for example, a Glenfiddich 21-year-old has been aged in ex-bourbon and ex-sherry cask for 21 years and then finished in a Caribbean rum cask for additional 2 years.
Wow.
So that is an extensive period of aging and nurturing it. So every part of every type of wood
adds certain character.
a certain character, right? So that's what the entire thing is, that different types of wood give different flavors, and today the entire exploration or experimentation, to put it that way, in the whiskey industry is happening with the use of different types of woods, the use of different types of used casks.
Right.
And that's what the whiskey is imparting its flavor from. Whether it be a champagne cask or a cognac cask or a beer cask or a Mizunara cask in Japan, as we were talking about, there is an ocean of it.
I have to share this experience, and I was at a beautiful restaurant in Ahmedabad. Amazing. Okay, and Ahmedabad
There was no alcohol in it. There was no alcohol in there, right?
There was no alcohol, but this is what is interesting. They gave coffee, served coffee, black coffee, but the coffee was aged in a whiskey cask.
Yeah, that's a common phenomenon these days. It's the new trend.
It's a new trend apparently, and I tried it, and I can't tell you how pleased I was to have that coffee. There was no alcohol in it, but the aftertaste and the flavor, that really left a certain experience in my mouth, and I really loved it. So it's I'm sure you are in the know and you know more about it.
Today we have barrel aged coffees which have been there in the world for quite some time, but India has really caught up to the whole trend, and they are doing really good barrel aged coffees. So the notes of the whiskey inside the barrel or the cask is where the coffee imparts its notes and flavors from, which is great. Consumer getting those notes as well, and I think it's something that's gonna become really big in near future. Yeah,
and more so in countries and societies where a lot of people don't necessarily drink alcohol.
Yeah,
or maybe it is not allowed.
Yeah, 100%.
can kind of bring, it kind of brings.
There's a whole new sector of alcohol which is no alcohol or no ABV inside it. For example, there are gins with no alcohol, zero ABV. And
Wow.
there are beers today by the big brands like Heineken and Budweiser. They're all making zero ABV beers. So that category is really gaining popularity in Western countries in the first markets. And we see that there's a huge demand for it.
Nice.
There are nights out when you don't want to drink, but you still want to have a drink in your hand, and you don't want to get drunk because you're driving or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a market for everything in this world, and
Yeah.
I think that is gaining popularity as well.
So you mentioned gins as well, and India in the past decade perhaps, there's been a trend of a lot of gin brands, and I hear from friends who are
Still
deep
is.
into it. Gin, and a lot of people are coming up with gin brands and high quality gin brands.
Yeah.
And I think the latest trend is rum brands.
Yeah, rum is also picking up.
Rum is
really
picking
well.
up,
Yeah.
so just touch
But not
touch
as
on-
big as gin.
Not as big as
Gin is really big, and gin is still growing in India. If you see the
So why has it captured the imagination of Indian audience?
See, I mean, in India, people were drinking vodka, and they were drinking a hell lot of vodka because there wasn't a brown spirit tag associated to it. So the younger
brown
gen-
spirit tag? What?
yeah, like brown spirit tag as in drinking a rum or a whiskey.
Okay.
That's considered to be a brown spirit, right? And
Is that something bad or not bad? Is it considered bad?
no, it's just a brown. Like for example, a younger audience, or like if you are 18-year-old and your father's been drinking rums and whiskeys all this while, you would be like, I
Then
want
you
to be
wanna do
cool, I
that.
want to drink something else. Or the women, they want to do something light, and
Yeah.
in their mind they are drinking vodka, which they thought probably is a lighter spirit, which is not really true. But that was the trend. They were drinking a lot of vodka, and there was a weird population where the younger generation, of course, after drinking age, above drinking age, is coming to the whole semantics of drinking alcohol, and for them it was an easy choice. But when gin came in, and the gin revolution, which was started in I think the 60s and the 70s, it just became big. It just gave more flavor to your vodka.
Yeah.
It just made your spirit have more botanicals in it, and the consumer started enjoying those flavors in a white spirit, which wasn't the case before. And we didn't have any options when it came to gin as a category. But what has happened in the last 6-7 years is actually fantastic, right? So many gin brands have invested, so many Indian gin brands that are doing absolutely brilliant globally because of the play of different flavors that we as Indians have, and the quality of spirit that we are now making in India, which is making this entire category big. See, we're a decently good population here in India, right? If you make a good product, our
good audience.
mid-age audience and
Aspirational new, 20s, 30s.
yeah, middle class audience is also quite big. So if you see from that point of view, if you have a decent product, we have a market for you here in India.
Yeah.
And because of that, the whole halo, the international gin brands have noticed the change, noticed the growth that Indian gin brands are, and they're investing heavily into our markets. If you see from that perspective, brands are growing, the consumer is growing. And also, I would say COVID has a big part to it.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, I know so many people, who didn't just drink before COVID, but
The
have
fun thing
adopted,
is,
yeah.
I remember we were in, I'm from Bombay, that, and the moment things opened up immediately after COVID, where people beelined, the first thing, the intensity was right in front of the cash register of a liquor store.
That's right.
Take time, though, as if people were just waiting to get there, right?
Yes,
A fun story. So, while we were talking about, the casks and etc., another country which has done, what they do is they take the best of everything.
I know what
Tell
you're
them,
talking
Angad,
about.
what is the best that you do? Did you have? I have this, sir. Okay, can you give it to me? I want to experiment. And then they come back to you and say, this is what I've done. I said, bloody hell, you've made it better. Japan.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is this about the Japanese whiskies?
Yeah.
Right? The Yamazakis, etc. But what do they do? So talk about that phenomenon.
See, Japanese have been making quality whiskey from quite some time now. There's a region in Japan called Suntory, as per my knowledge, has been making fantastic whiskeys. What they did is that they actually did the whole innovation in terms of making right casks for themselves. The popular one being the Mizunara cask, which is known as the water oak or the oak of water retention, which is the Mizunara, where they're aging their whiskies in that cask and giving amazing aging flavors to the whiskey. The Japanese whiskies are quite light and floral in their characteristics. If you see, they're not very strong in character, and that's why every time consumer doesn't want something extremely big on the palate in terms of flavor. He doesn't want that overwhelming flavor, right? That's why they have a great niche, great market for themselves. However, I feel that they're still extremely small as in terms of product development or in terms of the limitation of producing whiskey. It's a small region, right? Natural resources, availability of water is still not as big there. So the supply is still limited. The demand, if you see, is humongous.
And which is why the prices are like through the roof.
Whenever you make a huge demand and control the supply. Very similar to the watch that you're wearing, right? Very similar to the watch you're wearing.
Absolutely.
You control the supply of it, just everybody wants it. Right?
Yeah, so about Rolex, I'll just add a story, right? Despite the fact that Rolex actually makes the highest number of watches in the world.
Wow.
So I'll tell you about the volume. So Audemars Piguet, right? Or let me pronounce it, Audemars Piguet. Okay. APE does 50,000 watches as of now in a year, right? And if you divide it by per day, that comes to 170 watches per day. That's a huge number, you would imagine, right? Because it takes a lot of work, handwork, etc., from all the experts. And that's a very small supply, Angad. And there's a global demand, which is why prices are through the roof. And in the aftermarket, what happens? Do you know how many watches Rolex does in a year? Make a guess. AP does 50,000.
Maybe 10 lakh?
Oh my God, spot on. They do 1 million watches in a year.
Wow.
Now the thing is to do watches of this quality at that scale is a monumental task.
Right.
And there's only one brand that could actually get there. And to make watches of this quality in a highly mechanized setup and at that volume is just a feat that is not easily copied. And despite that huge number, look, we talked about another significant brand that they do 50,000 watches. FP Journe has it captured everybody's imagination. It's going crazy. They do 800 watches in a year. Angad, 800 watches only. These guys do 1 million watches, but despite that supply, the demand is actually multiple times of it. It's crazy, which is why the demand and supply mechanism is still applicable to Rolex. And I just wanted to add that story there.
Absolutely right. And we see a similar trend in whiskey. We see a similar trend in shoes.
Yeah.
In drops that the world has. It's going in the right direction, I feel, for us, right?
In fact, for us, and in fact, I see that this is the right way of, marketing and, running a business, right? Because look, you can always say, fine, there is enough demand. Why don't I multiply? But then what is going to happen is that, to maintain this kind of quality,
you can't do that.
Easy. You can't do that. You can't just say tomorrow, I'm multiplying the production. Not really help. It will screw you. It will completely,
It'll change the quality.
Yeah.
And it'll change the premiumness of the same product. I would say if everybody would have a Rolex and nobody would want a Rolex.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. And so the quality goes down as well. So good. I just wanted to kind of draw a parallel. It's something very interesting. I have a few more questions. For example, as a gentleman, right? How do you really drink as a gent? What does a gent do when it comes to his liquor?
Just drink it.
Just drink it. Is there any kind of?
No, I mean for whiskey, I would say I prefer drinking it with a splash of water.
What does adding water do to it?
Opens the whiskey up.
And what does this opening the whiskey up mean?
It probably gives you a proper nose and all the flavors of the whiskey in a more sensorial way. Your senses will understand the whiskey in a much better way. Similar to what you do to wine, you move it in a glass, oxidize it, oxygen opens it up. Wine being a fermented spirit, whiskey is distills to open it up.
You need a bit of water.
Yeah, dash of water is always good.
Very cool. Yeah. Very cool. So this is the explanation. A lot of people may not understand, right? I tell you a fun thing. So I had just graduated and I was a young analyst at a big consulting firm back in 2006. And there was this annual day, and there was this partner. He was quite drunk and wasted, and in front of him I added thumbs up to my whiskey. He said a very nasty thing, he said that you could just, you might want to add XYZ to your whiskey as well and just have it. Don't spoil your whiskey with thumbs up. That's what he said. It's a fun story. So, the other thing I want to check with you, let's say for the audience, for the gentlemen, they have a lady and they're hosting, and if they ask the lady, what drink can they present, and she says, surprise me, what 2 or 3 things can they do?
Yeah, I would say she's saying surprise me, but she does not really want to be surprised that much. So stick to the basics.
Yeah, so what are the basics?
I would say get her a glass of wine to start with, and if you know what alcohol she likes, then it's easier for you. But if you have no idea what she likes, then I think you should start.
So wine is a safe option, but other than wine, let's say, should they be looking at gin, because gin has so many botanical flavors and characters?
I don't know. I mean, I'm from a school of thought where I've been advocating whiskey for a long time, right? And for me, like for my sisters, my aunts, they've all been drinking whiskey. So for me, there is no gender bias when it comes to whiskey.
Correct.
Women around me have been drinking whiskey, so for me, it's not like I'm gonna offer a gin to a girl and a whiskey to a guy. It can be vice versa. My brother, one of my closest mates, he drinks gin. He does not drink whiskey. And it's his choice, So for me, I don't think those biases hold any value anymore. Why I said wine, it could be even if a guy would come and say, surprise me, and I'm meeting that guy for the first time, I would actually just be like really
careful.
Yeah, careful, because whenever, and this is just my learning and my point of view, when someone says that surprise me, they actually don't want to be surprised. They don't really want to put their brains into it, their mind into it, and that's why they say that I'll do whatever you're doing, but they don't really want to.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think I'll personally go easy on this.
Super.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Pleasure.
Yeah, great fun talking to you. मेरे को भी बहुत मजा आया. दोबारा करते हैं.
Thank you. That was Angad for you, and
Cheers.
Please drop your comments as to whether you liked it, what you liked it, and what else would you want to know, because Angad is the guy.
I'm drama on Instagram, guys. Give me a shout out if you like it. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you guys. Bye.